Welcome to Yakuza, Like a Dragon. We're going to talk about RPG experiences today, how they unfold and how you can control them. To do that, we're going to talk about this RPG experience in particular, and that's a long-winded way of saying spoilers. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. So if you plan to play this game, go play it, because I'm going to spoil it. Alright, let's get started. This game is very competent. All of the parts of this game that are game are competent. So all of the character designs, the concept, the dialogue, the animation, the models, the textures, the interfaces, the physics, everything is fine. But the parts that are RPG specific actually suck. And that's really interesting to me because this is a very competent team, but it's clear that they're not an RPG team. They're clearly a team that does other kinds of games, like, say, Yakuza action games. So because of that, we can see that the parts of this game that suck are probably RPG specific. They're not general game things, or this team would have nailed them. So let's talk about them. Let's talk about what makes an RPG experience different than other games and why it's so critical to get it right. Now, if you played this game and didn't see anything wrong with it, that is absolutely 100% fine. You do not have to notice every flaw in every game you play. I will not hold it against you that you enjoyed a game, I assure you. I enjoyed this game too. But the flaws are worth looking at simply because they are so uniquely RPG focused. Now, the first thing you have to understand about an RPG is that now isn't what matters. There is no part of the game, aside from the very, very most important plot beats, where now is what you care about. We don't care about here. This is not anything we care about. But this place lets us see the future. Oh, look, we could go over there. We could try and recruit somebody. Look, there's like some lady standing over there. What's that about? Oh, can we go under the bridge? Maybe. Look over there. We can definitely go over the bridge over there. Oh, look, there's some glowing buildings over there. And, maybe see some enemies, some shops. Let's go somewhere. That's the point of every system in an RPG. The RPG systems exist. I'm saying system very loosely here. All of the pieces of an RPG, they don't exist to create cool moments now. They exist to tell you that there are cool moments later. They exist to draw you into the future. That's a really important thing to internalize when you're designing an RPG, because it is absolutely critical. The point of an RPG is that the player wants to move forward. They want to do the next thing. They want to go to the next place, see the next plot point. Those things are absolutely critical, and I have a feeling you're not convinced yet, because this is not something that gets talked about a lot. So let's talk about a specific element. Let's talk about combat, okay? So if you're playing Mass Effect, you know that you're going to need, a dose of soldier, a dose of technician, and a dose of psychic. You might take those in like half doses or, that sort of thing, but you understand that those are the accepted pillars of the combat engine. And as you're playing through, you're like, okay, well, my technician psychic has some upgrades I can get, and I think this upgrade over here is going to be really useful. It's a couple levels away. In the long term, I want to see if I can get my warrior guy to have sniper capabilities, and you plan ahead. The combat engine doesn't exist to tell you that combat at this moment is interesting. It exists to inform your plans for the future. You want to upgrade Tally or whatever, and it's there to form those opinions and help you to figure out what the future holds for your party. It's the same way with most other games. Like, oh yeah, you might take a paladin or a cleric, but you're definitely aiming at that like healing buff part of the party because you understand that you're going to probably need that kind of element, and you're like, okay, well, I can build that particular team element with this particular kind of build. In a couple of levels I can get this and that, and maybe I'll spec for mace mastery or whatever. It's all about planning for the future, and in order to do that, the parts have to work together in ways that are understood by you. in ways that tell you how you can polish those parts in the future. This game doesn't do that. So there are a bunch of jobs here, and the jobs are fun to look at. Oh, chef, musician, foreman, devil rocker. There's no future in these classes. Is a rank 21 hero better than a rank 19 breaker or a rank 17 foreman? I don't know. Their capabilities are not spelled out very well. They're basically just interchangeable job cogs, and it's impossible to feel how they are going to interact with other jobs. There's no synergy, and that means I can't really feel like there's a future in any of these classes. Similarly, I can't really feel like there's a future in any particular weapon choices or armor choices. It's just whatever happens, happens. It's a very now-focused situation. Oh, did you level up? Well, here's what you happened to get this level. There's no planning for the future. Oh, did you get new equipment? Well, give it to whoever works best with it, I guess, because it's all interchangeable. Nobody cares. There are, minor exceptions, but by and large, this game does not have a strong sense of future in its combat system, because the combat system doesn't have any synergy. It's just a bunch of stats that are thrown at the screen. When you steal away the future like that, you've closed off an avenue into the future. It's really quite simple. So that just means that if your present is ever weak, there's no future to look forward to, and that means that there's speed bumps. A speed bump is any situation where you get a little annoyed at the game, right? So if you're getting a speed bump in a game of D&D, one of those 10 million CRPGs that are D&D based, you get a speed bump there, you think, okay, well, I just got to push through this speed bump because, around the next corner, I'm going to get a level, my paladin's going to get a rank up, and I'll get the next tier of healing or whatever. You get pulled into the future because you can see the future. There's something interesting in the future for you. So you hit a speed bump, you're fine. But in a game with no future, you hit a speed bump and you're like, well, since the only thing I have is now, and now sucks, I guess I'm done. This is why it's important that all the systems, all the pieces of an RPG pull the player into the future. And none of the pieces of this RPG do that. And it's really the biggest flaw with how this RPG is created. I think it's probably worth talking about the structure of the story. And I guess I should say the structure of the narrative rather than the story. Calling RPGs linear or open world is old hat. There's not really a divide. It's a spectrum. This is a very linear game, but it's also very open world. The plot beats happen at very specific intervals. Day does not turn into night or night back into day without you accomplishing the next mission objective. But you can explore this world however you want within that time frame. You can fight all of the enemies. You can go do the side quests. You can take on the optional dungeon or whatever. You can rank up to level 1 in your business management, whatever it is you want to do. So would you call this a linear game or an open world game? And my point is that those labels are not really very useful. What is useful is thinking about how those experiences work in terms of setting us up for the future. How do those experiences let us get drawn into the future? Well, with a linear game, the idea is that your linear experience is very predictable. So you can write it such that the player will know that the future that's coming up is going to be very specific and interesting. The less of a grip you hold on that linear experience, the more open world and loosey-goosey you play, the more the player is going to be allowed to just look forward to whatever their little heart desires. Oh, you want to run another dungeon? Well, there's another dungeon just over that hill. This dungeon was quite short. That's fine, because it's not the point. This dungeon is just another bite of dungeon for you, and if you want another bite of dungeon, here's the address of the next one. Have fun. These are just two very different approaches in how these kinds of futures get laid out for us. One of them is very focused on what the player might want right now, and the other one is very focused on making sure the player has something very juicy to look forward to. They're not really, neither approach is wrong, and they're not exclusive. You do both approaches all of the time. The question is, when does it make sense to grip tightly, and when does it make sense to grip loosely? I was talking about speed bumps earlier. Well, the most important thing to understand is that a linear experience is generally going to be very fragile. You've created a very specific sort of future. The player wants to see exactly what happens next in this plot. But if you hit a speed bump and the player kind of gets distracted from that and stops caring, then the player, there's just nothing to look forward to. The player is going to stop playing. That's when the open world stuff can really save the day. If I run into a part of the plot that just doesn't interest me, I've just gotten distracted or demotivated by something random, I can go off and I can do some open worldy stuff. I can rank myself up or whatever. I get rescued because I have a different future to look forward to. The game has provided me with many futures, one of which is crystal clear and super finely cut. And maybe I don't want that one today. Maybe I want a different one today. Those other futures, that openness, allows me to continue to play the game without feeling demotivated. In case I haven't made it clear, that's not really how this game is structured. There are a lot of open worldy elements in this game, but they are all in the mid-game. Which, I mean, that's not too shabby. But in general, open worldy stuff in RPGs is really critical in the early game and in the late game. It's critical in the early game because repeating the tutorial is extremely boring. The tutorial in this game is like 5 hours long. And if there is open worldy stuff there, we can just stop playing the tutorial and go do that stuff instead. That's like the Skyrim approach. In the late game, it's important because the late game is the part of the game where the tension generally runs highest. And that tension is easy to lose. It's easy to get tired of. It's easy to get distracted from. It's easy to have that thread get snapped. And it's important to have some other future to dive into, at least for a little while. And this game does not have that. Near the late game, there is a situation where you go to another town. And that town has the next plot point in it, the Omi Alliance raid. And you go into the Omi Alliance raid, and if you're anything like me, you get your ass completely kicked, because I was 15 levels under-leveled. But unfortunately, there's really nothing else to do at that point. There's no more open world stuff left. The only open world stuff left is an optional dungeon in that same area. So you go and you clear out that one optional dungeon, that one piece of side content that was left, and it's just combat. There's nothing interesting to it at all. And then you go back and you get your butt kicked again because the boss is really unbalanced, because the RPG is not very carefully balanced. And you don't really have anything else you want to do. There's no place to go to cool off. There's no place to go to reset. It's just, you're done. There's no more content. The only content left for you is the end game content, and you've just shown me that that content is annoying. To make matters worse, in this particular case, I looked up how other people are doing the boss, and it turns out there is a glitch that most people are taking advantage of when they fight this boss, and it's like, oh, so I just spent 10 hours grinding through an optional dungeon I didn't even like because it was the only thing available, just to be told I should have used a glitch. No, that's not a fun speed bump. And obviously that's one of the reasons I decided to make this video, to show you how important it is to understand when you need to offer up those alternative futures. If an RPG is all about showing the player futures, you need to really focus on that. Your level design always needs to be showing me where I want to go next. Your character classes always need to be selling me on what the character class will be able to do in a couple of levels. Your plot always needs to be selling me on what is going to be revealed by the next plot point. And your optional side content needs to be telling me what I can go do if I want a different future today. Those are things that this game just does not do. At least not very well. And I feel like those things are very RPG specific. Most games are about now. If you fight in a fighting game, yeah, well, this fight is the fight that matters. But in an RPG, this fight is just telling you whether or not your plans for the future can go along as planned or if you need to change them. And that's that. Have a good one.